Imagine what your life would look like if you stopped accepting the barriers placed in front of you. Welcome to Limitless Living with Purpose and Joy, the podcast dedicated to discovering the alternatives. Each week, we tackle the 3 hurdles of limitations that get in our way: the external pressures of society, the internal noise of self-doubt, and the physical challenges that try to slow us down. Together, we will uncover the solutions to help us live our best lives. And now, your host, Trace Kingham.
Welcome to Limitless Living with Purpose and Joy. I am Trace Kingham, and today we're talking about a major external hurdle, and this is the plastic hurdle, curiosity, and our waterways. So today we're looking at what literally surrounds all of us in this planet is plastics. And I really got excited and kind of curious about this topic when I watched on Netflix the Plastic Detox, and she was the doctor that was really working with couples around the country and helping them with their infertility and reducing plastics in their home. And it got me just kind of really curious of how is that impacting me? And so I reached out to our guest today to learn a little bit more about this topic. And our guest is Mark Warman. He's from the Ohio Sea Grant at the Ohio State University. Mark specializes in education and outreach, helping communities understand the health of our greatest local resource, which is Lake Erie in Ohio here, and our waterways. So I'm going to bring Mark to the stage and welcome to our show.
Thank you very much for having me today, Trace.
Yeah, excited to just talk about this and have our listeners really understand, and maybe just like I said, get a little curious about the topic, not panic, because I think we're getting a lot of information about plastics and how they're impacting us and our world, but really just hearing what you're doing at the Ohio Sea Grant, and then maybe add some curiosity. And you got some great resources we'll talk about. But before we dive into about what you're doing and who you are, I want to ask you a quick question for anyone that might hear this topic, maybe watch that show on Netflix. Like me, I got a little overwhelmed. What advice would you give them, a limitless mind shift for anyone kind of wanting to learn more, or maybe feeling helpless, like I can't do anything about this challenge that we're all facing on our planet with plastics? What advice would you give them?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely understand kind of the anxiety or the feeling that this is such a big issue. Plastic pollution is like a perfect non-point source issue. It comes from many different places, and the evidence suggests that it's building up in our environment and in our bodies. So there can be kind of some feelings, like anxious feelings around it. What I would tell people who are concerned about their own exposure, how much plastic they might breathe in that's floating in the air, or drink or ingest through our food systems, is I just kind of start small, maybe consider bottled water versus tap water first. Drinking water is where we have a lot of evidence about plastic pollution, especially when we're getting more detail about the really small pieces like microplastics and smaller nanoplastics. And again, science and evidence suggests that there's more plastic particles floating in bottled water than coming from our taps. So that's a good example of using science and evidence to make some good decisions about plastic exposure in our own individual lives. And maybe you could snowball that into food next and think about avoiding heating things in plastic containers, for instance.
Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up a good point here, and that is that you're talking about bottled water maybe have more plastics than tap, and we're so conditioned, I think, today to really dive into using bottled water over tap. And my son, for example, said, can I get bottled waters? Can you go to the store and get some bottled water so I don't have to drink that sink water? Maybe sink water is better for us. I don't know. So it's an interesting premise that you bring up.
We should have a lot of confidence in our public water utility systems. They're well regulated, they're well monitored and well tested. And for your son, a lot of times bottled water is kind of sink water from somewhere else, and it may not be subject to the same kind of strict rules and regulations that our public utilities have to monitor for so many things:
Mm,
metals, forever chemicals, bacteria loads. Plastic is kind of right now, it's an unregulated contaminant, or like a candidate contaminant. We know that it's occurring in our drinking water systems, but there's no formal like protocol standards to monitor for small bits of plastic in water. So
mm,
that's kind of like a national perspective. Is the United States is wrangling with, do they've listed microplastics as a contaminant candidate. So again, they recognize it's in the water, and US EPA is responding to broad public concern, saying, should we include this for more research? Should we include this for more monitoring? Should we attempt to develop some of the standards so we're all kind of monitoring plastic pollution in drinking water in the same ways? So that's not to say that drinking water and microplastics will be listed as an unregulated contaminant. That's kind of making the next step another list. But right now it's being considered for like a greater priority. So, yeah, what you and your family are discussing, it really is happening right now all around us, locally, nationally, and globally, as we all kind of reckon with plastic pollution that we're finding in more and more places. And drinking water is really kind of a first place to start,
yeah.
because it affects us and our human health too.
Sure. Yeah. For me, and I don't know if this is the right approach, but I'm buying bottled water in glass versus plastic because I don't know how long that water's been sitting in those plastic bottles in the store. I'm buying cans instead of plastic. So, again, it feels good. I don't know if there's enough evidence or research to know that the water is better in those containers versus plastic bottles, or I'm also looking at a reverse osmosis system for my sink so that we can have drinking water, that we feel at least is somewhat of filtered water for us to consume. So lots out there to figure out. So, but before we dive into talking further, I want to make sure we talk a little bit about you, Mark, and what specifically you're doing at the Ohio Sea Grant that really helps and is within our state, but it's obviously across the state line. So, can you tell a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So, sea grant programs, if your state touches a Great Lake or an ocean, you have a sea grant program. And we help do education, outreach, and research about, in this case, our water resources in Ohio, including and especially our Great Lake, Lake Erie. So it's really a privilege to be able to help translate some of the emerging science around some of these issues like plastic pollution, um, to help individuals and communities and decision makers make good choices for the health and well-being of our aquatic resources, but also, just us as a society too. Ohio Sea Grant is funded in part through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so NOAA. And
Hmm.
through that funding, we can sponsor and fund research projects that are important to Ohioans. So some of the ongoing or like just wrapped up projects that Ohio Sea Grant has helped fund include things like our plastic leachates affecting the Lake Erie ecosystem. So we know you were mentioning glass bottles versus plastic bottles. Plastic can be porous, so kind of like it, if you've ever seen a food storage container or like a Tupperware that's held pasta sauce in it, it may get an orange tint. It can absorb some of the food, but it can
Mm.
also, like we shed skin cells, also shed fragments or leach chemicals. And to better understand how plastics that are being degraded by sunlight and wave action and beat up in the sand, um, how all of those different components like stabilizers, plasticizers to make things soft, different like flame retardants, additives, how are those affecting our Lake Erie ecosystem? We funded research there out of Bowling Green. And then recently that went to publication was a comparison of drinking water treatment plants to see if they could remove micro and smaller nanoplastics at different stages of the water treatment process for our drinking water. And then they compared those results, which I thought was pretty interesting, to bottled water. And that's kind of why I'm making those statements that we evidence suggests that bottled water has more, and especially the tiny bits, the nanoplastic, much
Mhm.
more than tap water across different studies too. But this one came out of Dr. John Lenhart's engineering lab with a newly minted PhD, Megan Jameson Hart. So yeah, that's kind of how Sea Grant exists: education, outreach, research, and especially focused on our waterway health.
That's great. I mean, that's fascinating. And again, for me, a little light bulb, kind of goes off that, maybe we should trust our tap water a little bit more than being just so conditioned. And I think we are conditioned to, bottled water is better. Bottled water is better. When we were traveling, we were just recently, my family, we went to Switzerland and Italy, and we'd always order water at the table, and they'd bring bottles in glass. But I found out through some research, use my Google AI and kind of checking that, Switzerland has some of the safest drinking water in the world, and it's glacier, it has full of minerals, and they use a reverse osmosis process there for all their drinking water. So we just started drinking tap water. It was refreshing and great, and I got a confidence. So I'm glad to hear that, should have a little more confidence in here in Ohio and around our country, that drinking water can be safe here in our communities. So, well, very good. Well, I talk about being the CEO of our own body quite a bit on this show, and for me, my curiosity after watching and talking with you and sharing resources that you've provided, which we'll talk about here in a moment, is, I've been looking at like the clothing that I'm wearing, going back to full cottons and rubber versus latex and polyesters, and, really trying to feel, because you mentioned that these plastic shed, and our bodies, our skin is an organism that absorbs. So I've been very conscious of wearing bamboo socks. So I'm kind of just diving all in and seeing how, if it makes me feel better, or it's very micro at this point, but I'm having a great time kind of figuring that out. So what resources, you mentioned earlier, what resources do you provide, or does the Ohio Sea Grant or the Ohio State University extension provide for our guests and listeners, and I can post to look through and see what can they do to help not only our the pollution, but also maybe resources about our plastic footprint that we're creating in our world around us.
Sure. Yeah. I would say first, that's a great start, Trace, for you and your family. You're probably, through those actions, reducing the amount of plastics that you're breathing in, that you're eating and drinking too. So, Ohio State and Ohio Sea Grant, and a lot of different state extension offices too. They'll publish widely about sustainability topics. Plastic pollution is one of them. So there are lots of tip and fact sheets available on our website, like
Mhm.
tips to avoid single-use plastic. Bottled waters being one example, plastic straws another, tips to kind of bring more actions into sports. There are specific videos for lots of different audiences to accompany those fact sheets too. In Ohio, we have a really great Clean Marinas program coordinated through Ohio Sea Grant, and they offer services to collect shrink wrap. If you've ever seen boats that are like winterized, covered in that heavy plastic, they
Mhm.
will collect that and recycle it at certain recyclers in Ohio and turn them into like road blocks that can go on the guardrails along highways. And it's a pretty nice system. So we try to give Ohioans some even like economic reasons about why recycling it can work in our communities and can create jobs. Also help in our communities organize and support beach cleanups, river cleanups, just in general, trying to beautify our natural and wild areas. And we know that the debris that's building up on the side of the road or washing into a storm drain, that large plastic over time will break down and fragment into smaller and smaller pieces. Um, One final resource, so it's good to get those big pieces of plastic out of our environment, is what I mean to say. One final resource that I'll offer here is that we try to translate the emerging research as best as we possibly can to make it relatable and usable for people. And you mentioned clothing and like polyester, which is a plastic fiber. Um, what the evidence suggests from the Great Lakes region is that we've got a lot of buildup of fibers in sediment, in the water, in wildlife like fish tissue. Um, and so fibers, and that could be upholstery or carpeting. It comes from a lot of places. Uh, Maybe trying to have some action on that specific particle, that type of plastic pollution makes a lot of sense because we have evidence to suggest that it's really becoming a challenge for our water resources.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's very, it's around us. I mean, I know it's I don't know exactly when it all started, but I know that once polyester kind of hit the scene, it made it a lot less expensive for the manufacturers to, have these products offered to us at lower prices, which was appealing to us, but we didn't really understand what it might be doing to us because there was no research in that. So I love that you're talking about the research and all this. And when I looked at your Ohio State University Extension sustainability fact sheets that you sent me, and I'll share that in our notes following this podcast, is there's teaching sustainability to kids, 10 tips for packing waste-free lunches, reducing your single-use plastic use, phasing plastic out of your home. I mean, there's so many great links and videos and documents here. I had a flurry of great reading, and I still haven't gotten through all of it. There's so much on this website, so I'll be sure to share all that. But I want to go back to your comment about the beach cleanups, and you in our conversations leading up to this podcast, you pointed me to some amazing work being done by organizations like Plastic Free Milwaukee, Plastic Free Cleveland. It seems like, the limitless solution is in community. So can you tell us a little bit about, what you're seeing and how these organizations are really mobilizing our community to help clean up our waterways?
Yes. Yeah. I think the audiences that I talk with, whether it's high schoolers or like adult learners or even younger learners too, they're kind of interested in real, impactful, meaningful like solutions to plastic pollution. And we've talked a lot about individuals, but bigger in the community, individuals working together. There, like you mentioned, some really good organizations. We help coordinate Plastic Free Cleveland, which is Ohio Sea Grant does, which is a group of public and private partners and nonprofits that their job duties overlap with plastics in some way. And this is kind of an issues focused group. One of the working groups is erosion control matting and landscape fabric. These are really large applications of plastic fibers that are applied to like construction sites.
Mm-hmm.
Are there alternative products? How well do they work? Are they going to be like good standard replacements? And if there are good alternatives that reduce plastic pollution, how do we share that information or come up with, incentives to help construction companies understand the issue of plastic pollution, and also maybe make a greener choice along the way. And that's based on Plastic Free Milwaukee, which does a really good job of integrating community voices, listening to challenges, and coming up with solutions. So Ohio State and Ohio Sea Grant don't really wade into the policy of like you should do this or we're prescribing this, but we exist in a place to present the facts, present the information, and again use science to make good decisions. And a lot of times, I get good ideas from community meetings. I was at like a civic and environmental leaders group in the city of Toledo, which has a nickname, the Glass City, for glass manufacturing there. And I think one of the leaders was saying, it's in our name, the Glass City. Maybe we should use more of this alternative to plastic. Are there ways we can use glass to
Mhm.
replace some of, especially like the single use plastic that we know is polluting our lakes and rivers? And then, like, plastic does have a strong place in our society. There are a lot of uses for it, and it's very relatable to have like struggles as an individual or like feeling anxious about this really enormous use of plastic in our world. Um, but yeah, I just want to say it's not. We recognize that there are really important uses and applications for plastic too. But
Certainly.
I applaud the community leaders who are like, we're the glass city. Why? Maybe
Mhm.
we can do some more with glass.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think that that's really, I encourage anyone listening to this to, do your research, get involved, find some of these cleanup groups if that's fuels your passion. And I feel like if you're empowering yourself to do some of these things, you might feel like you're making it, supporting more of a reduction of plastics. But like you say, I think plastics have clearly improved our lives and lifestyles over the use of. But we're finding, for me and the research that I've been doing, and I, you have to keep an open mind because sometimes these products that they're selling are using some fear tactics and other ways to kind of, point to you buying their product, but you just have to follow your gut. In this podcast, I always talk about the answers are inside of all of us. So if we can take a moment to pause, read something and reflect if it resonates within you, then I think it's true. So for me, I learned a lot that there's a lot of, microplastics in beauty products, so lotions. And so I've changed to like an all natural, plastic free body lotion that is edible, so thinking if I can ingest it, then it's good for my skin. So because my skin's ingesting it just in a different way. So I just encourage everyone listening to this to really go to that website that I'll share, the Ohio State University Extension Sustainability website. It's got great resources. It can really kind of help you with your curiosity about this product. And I hope this show is really getting you to think a little bit more about this and how you can reduce the footprint for our community, for our planet, but also for your health and for your well-being. So Mark, I think we could continue on. I think there's just so much more that we could talk through, but I plan on having, inviting you and others back because I think there's so much more to talk about. I've reached out to a few of those organizations that shared with me as we prepared for today's podcast, but thank you for your time. Is there anything you'd like to share, that again would be a limitless mind shift that you would recommend someone if they're now listening to this conversation and being like, what can I do? Is there something here locally in Ohio that you would share, or maybe all communities have that could really get engaged, or maybe step in and say, I'm going to be an activist, or get involved somehow just to help feel that I'm making a difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I would say that, consumer demand can really affect trends in our society. So working together as a community for solutions that you think are worthy, that's a good place to be. I I think about also just wherever you are, just getting out and enjoying nature, maybe, trying to identify a bird you haven't seen before or picking up a fishing rod and, getting a fishing license and going fishing if you want. But I, I don't think. your audience needs, they can kind of see the plastic challenges with their own eyes if they're out and
Mhm.
about. Beaches, river walks, communities along the street. We used to say that plastic pollution like decomposed, it sort of went away, but we're coming to find out that it just kind of gets smaller and smaller, fragmented and more fragmented. So I, I would say getting out, and I suspect that it would probably generate a lot of curiosity in people. Like you're probably going to hear more about plastic pollution in the future.
Yeah.
So get out, enjoy nature, and think about the ways that we're connected to it. The great ways, and then maybe the ways that we can help out help out the
Yeah.
planet and our local community, because I think that's where a lot of like environmental movements in the United States start, are with people caring about what's happening locally, real grassroots.
Yeah, and that the Plastic Detox, as I mentioned at the top of the program on Netflix, is a great show if you want to watch that. It has a lot of history of plastics, how it got into clothing, how it got into household products, and it's very fascinating. It's just not alarming, but it's kind of like, oh, there are things that I can be doing to help my household, but also help my community. So I think that's a great resource. And then I would research and find organizations that are doing beach cleanups and waterway cleanups. And honestly, if you're taking a walk down a path and you see plastic, pick it up and put it in its proper place. And hopefully it's being recycled. I don't know if all communities do a proper recycling, but certainly. I know that is another topic that we could talk for quite a bit on the recycling journey of a plastic bottle. But well, thank you so much again, Mark, for your time and all the great information. You've been amazing to work with and really learn more about this topic. So thank you. Thank you. And to the listeners, if your curiosity is really the first step to change, so don't let the scale of our world hurdles stop you from taking your own small steps. And if you want to learn more about the research that Mark just discussed, you can check out links in the Ohio Sea Grant fact sheets, and I'll put those in the show notes, as I said earlier. And I'm Trace Kingham. Stay curious and let's live limitless. And I look forward to joining you on our next podcast. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again, Mark.
Thanks, Trace.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Limitless Living with Purpose and Joy. Subscribe and follow. New episodes are released every Wednesday. Find the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit limitlesslivingwithpurposeandjoy.com for show notes.